Hello and welcome. My name is Mark Horseman, Data Evangelist with DATAVERSITY. We would like to thank you for joining the current installment of the monthly DATAVERSITY webinar series, Real World Data Governance with Bob Seiner. Bob's topic this holiday season is structured and unstructured data governance excellence. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. If you would like to chat with us or chat with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. And just to note, Zoom chat defaults to send to just the panelists, but you may absolutely switch that to network with everyone. For questions, we'll be collecting them by the Q&A section. To find the chat and the Q&A panels, you'll find the icons for those features in the bottom middle of your screen. As always, we will send a follow-up email within a couple of business days containing links to the slides, a recording of this session, and any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now, let me introduce to you our speaker for the series, Bob Seiner. Bob is the president and principal of KIK Consulting and Educational Services and the publisher emeritus of the data administration newsletter, tdan.com. Bob was recently awarded the DAMA Professional Award for significant and demonstrable contributions to the data management industry. Bob specializes in non invasive data governance, data stewardship, and metadata management solutions. And with that, I will hand the floor over to Bob to get the presentation started. Hello and welcome, my friend, and happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you too. Can you hear me okay?
I sure can.
I'm coming through loud and clear. Wow, that was a mouthful, Mark. I always appreciate the introduction. Thank you, everybody. I always say this as well. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules, whether you're attending this live or you're watching the recording. I think a lot of people end up watching the recording at their leisure. Can't think of anything more leisurely to do than to listen to a webinar on data governance. Mark, I don't know if I've said this before, but I seem to feel that this is the most important, maybe my most important webinar of the year. I've written a lot recently on the convergence of structured and unstructured, of data governance and information governance. I call it the great convergence of 2025. In fact, I wrote an article recently on LinkedIn where I talked about how governance in general will be changing in 2025. And it really is the unifying of governance of structured and unstructured data. And I talk about this a lot too. I say, AI that really doesn't care where it gets its data from. And there's a lot more data if you consider the structured data, the unstructured data, and the semi-structured data that exists within your organization. I'm going to define each of these as well. But I wanted to, before I got started, and certainly happy holidays to everybody, wherever you are. But I wanted to share that this is the 155th episode of the Real World Data Governance series. So I figured I'd make it a little bit festive, light it up here a little bit with some Christmas lights. I don't know if you saw there, but Santa flew up into the upper left-hand corner. I hear that those aren't drones in the sky. That's Santa doing his test run with his reindeer. So I'm sure that he will be visiting you and yours sometime soon. So again, we're going to talk about structured and unstructured data governance excellence. We're going to focus on again, this convergence and why it's important to govern all types of data, and hopefully give you a little bit of insight into what's coming in the future if it hasn't already landed on your doorstep already. Okay, take it away, Santa. And let's get started here. So I'm just going to spend a quick moment, as I typically do in the webinars, introducing myself. If you're not familiar with me, I talk a lot about data governance, about non-invasive data governance, about the subject. I've been doing this real-world data governance series with DATAVERSITY as my partner since 2012, since January of 2012. So if you're thinking, how did we get to 155 episodes? Why isn't it 156? There was one for health reasons early on that I ended up having to postpone, but this is the 155th. And next month, there's a kind of a different type of topic. We're going to talk about building resilient data governance strategies in a post-pandemic world. So what is the impact that the pandemic world and the post-pandemic world has had on governance strategies within organizations? It's always on the third Thursday of the month. There's multiple places you can go to register. I hope that I will see you there. I have to tell you, we've lined up a slew of incredible topics for 2025. Just to read you some, integrating AI into your governance framework. That's what I'm going to be talking about at the EDGO online conference coming up in January. That's what I spoke about last week at the DGIQ conference, how and why to conduct a data asset inventory. Again, a very important, especially now in this day and age that we're governing both structured and unstructured data and semi-structured. We need to have an inventory of that. So I could read through the whole list, but it's going to be a great year, 2025. So I'm looking forward to having you back then. As I said, I will be the second speaker in the EDGO conference that is taking place on Wednesday, January 22nd. I've written a couple of books on non-invasive data governance, one called Non-Invasive Data Governance, another one called Non-Invasive Data Governance Strikes Again. Those were published in 2014 and 2023. The first one is available in 7 languages. It's amazing that there's that much interest in the subject. And also in 2025, I'm going to be putting out the third book called Non-Invasive Data Governance Unleashed. So I look forward to sharing that with you. There's a couple learning plans available through DATAVERSITY on non-invasive data governance, non-invasive metadata governance. My consulting company is KIK Consulting and Educational Services. KIK stands for Knowledge is King. And as I say, in my spare time, I'm also an adjunct faculty member at Carnegie Mellon University here in my hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. One thing I added to this slide that I've never done before is just to share with you just a list of companies that have embraced the non-invasive data governance approach and that I've had the honor and the privilege of working alongside. When I share with you the kind of the case studies at the end of the webinar here, it's going to be, I won't speak specifically to a specific client, but all of these clients are focusing on the same challenges that you have within your organization. And if you're not looking down the pike to see that unstructured data is going to become part of the equation for AI in your organization, then you you should be looking for a different pike to head down. It is coming, and it's really part of what everything we should be thinking about in the present moment. So what are we here to talk about today? In this webinar, the first thing I'm going to do is kind of break down the diversity of different data types and give you a whole bunch of examples as to what is structured data, what is unstructured data, what is semi-structured data, what is the meaning of these things. And then I want to get into crafting a framework. And if you've attended these webinars in the past, you know that I talk about a non-invasive data governance framework. Well, I'm not going to talk specifically to that framework, but I'm going to use it as kind of the context to address structured and unstructured data. And then hopefully it would apply to whatever framework it is that you're using within your organization if you have one. Metadata is the one thing that kind of sits behind all 3 of these things: structured, unstructured, semi-structured data. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about metadata and the importance of having a taxonomy so that you're going to make this data available to people, make it searchable, make it observable to people across your organization. Metadata is an extremely important piece of governing structured and unstructured data, as it is any type of data. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about leveraging technology for data and information governance. I wrote another article on LinkedIn. I might refer to a few of these as we're talking here. But again, if you are interested, you can go back and look for them. This one is on an AI catalog. And we're talking about data catalogs and information catalogs. Well, I believe there's probably something coming down the pike, or a lot of the catalog tools, the technology that is available to help us to govern structured and unstructured data. We got to spend a few minutes talking about that and the importance of leveraging that technology to advance our cause in terms of governing these types of data. And then if I have any time at the end, I'm going to share some quick short stories, success stories, focusing on organizations that have focused on structured and unstructured data and some of the things that they've done in order to be successful. So again, thank you for attending today. Bear with me as I do something I do in every webinar, and I always start with the simple definitions of data governance, data stewardship, and what a data steward is. I repeat these in every webinar because I know there's some people that are new to the webinar series, even after 12 years, 13 years of doing this. And it's important to kind of set the context of where my mind is. And so I like to word the definition of data governance very strongly. When I say that data governance is the execution and enforcement of authority over data, it's going to be the structured data, it's going to be the unstructured data. There's a lot of organizations, even including my clients, that cringe when I say that data governance is the execution and enforcement of authority. I word it strongly for a reason. I word it strongly to get people to sit up in their chair and to pay attention. At the end of the day, the government is not coming to you and telling you to protect sensitive data, to regulate, to comply to rules associated with data. They're not asking you to do these things. They're telling you that you have to do these things. So at the end of the day, no matter what approach you take to data governance, whether it's the command and control top-down approach, or it's the traditional, if you build it, they will come type of approach, or even the non-invasive approach, the goal of data governance needs to be to execute and enforce authority. You may not use this as your definition, but I think that's short and sweet. And it really, governance, like government, we need to execute and enforce authority over the data. And it doesn't matter whether it's structured data, which I talked the most about, or unstructured or semi-structured data. I also talk about data stewardship in terms of, and you might have heard me say this before, that everybody in the organization is a steward of the data and that organizations should get over that. Well, actually, it's true. So if a person has a relationship to the data that they're being held formally accountable for, it's not something to opt into or opt out of. Instead of assigning people to be stewards, we need to be recognizing those people as stewards. We need to know who the stewards are. So stewardship is the formalization of accountability for data. A data steward is one of those people that have a relationship to the data as a definer, producer, or user of that data, and that is being held formally accountable for that relationship. And think about that in terms of all the different types of data that your organization has. This is not just the database in data in databases and spreadsheets. Again, I'm going to share with you a whole bunch of different examples of what is considered to be structured data, unstructured, semi-structured data. So I just wanted to start out with those definitions because it really even advances the context of what we're talking about today. Because you got to recognize that we need to govern structured and unstructured data, and we need to recognize who the stewards of that data are. All right, I always add a couple additional definitions. Those are the top three that I use repeatedly, but I also wanted just to provide a definition of what structured data is and what unstructured data is. So structured data is data that's highly organized in predefined formats. It's easily searchable using queries and things like that. It's the traditional data that most people think of when they think in terms of data. But I'm asking that you kind of expand your context to unstructured data. And that's that data that lacks predefined format or structured. And think about, documents. Think about emails and think about audio and video. All of those things contain data, and they're obviously more complex to analyze and to process, but we need to govern the unstructured data as well, because I said it before, I'll say it again, AI doesn't really care where it gets its data from. It could come from structured data, it could come from unstructured data. So let me share with you several examples of structured data. So these are data, and you can probably see your organization in these types of data. Believe me, there's a lot more than these types of structured data. But think of the similarity between these things. A lot of these things exist in systems. They exist in data, in straight data and databases and things like that. So this has a predefined format. When we think about data catalogs in general, oftentimes we're thinking about governing the structured data, the metadata about the structured data in the organization, the column name, the table name, the database name, the owner, all of these types of things. A lot of that pertains to structured data. Again, I don't want to beat this up, but I think you probably have a pretty good idea of what structured data is. I wanted to also provide a list to you of unstructured data. So you may, again, know of these things: text documents, emails, images, video, audio, all those things that I mentioned, social media posts, web content, articles and blogs. These are all unstructured data. And you know what? I had somebody yell at me several years ago that said, no, no, Bob, there's structure to these as well. Okay, I'll give you that. There's typically structure to these, but the structure may be different for every single type of unstructured data. And I don't know if that's the same holds true for structured data. So AI is going to use these types of data to build the models, to make decisions for organizations. So we need to consider the unstructured data. So when I titled this Structured and Unstructured Data Governance Excellence, the idea was that I was going to focus on structured and unstructured data mostly, but I also wanted to provide a definition of what semi-structured data is. Because semi-structured data is these other types of data that don't necessarily conform or fit into the structured or unstructured data categories that I've just laid out for you. And so think about your organization. There's a lot of semi-structured data. What's interesting is the definition of semi-structured data is that it includes organizational elements like tags and keys and metadata and those types of things. It makes it easier to parse these types of semi-structured data than it does unstructured data, which oftentimes don't have a lot of these things predefined, or they're not easy to get to within an organization. And again, thinking that, think of the future of your organization, and they're not going to care. I'd say they're not going to care where the data came from to make decisions. Um, and I've seen statistics, I can't cite any of them right off the top of my head, that says that there's a heck of a lot more unstructured and semi-structured data in your organization than there is structured data. So does this make this a worthwhile topic for today? I like to think that it does. So let's break into the topics. I always spend the beginning, and I know I've taken a little bit of time here to talk about the differences between these types of data. The first thing that I want to do is kind of jump into, and I'm going to do my best to get to the case studies at the end within this hour and leave time for Q&A. You can always submit questions through the Q&A. I know, Mark, that we've shared with them in the past that I love to answer the questions. So if you have questions for me that we don't get to today, please submit them, and DATAVERSITY will provide those to me, and I'll do my best to get answers to you as quickly as I can. So we're going to talk about understanding the diversity of data types first, structured versus unstructured, and how they're two sides of the same coin. We'll talk about that rise in the use of the term semi-structured data and the rise of semi-structured data in the organization. We'll talk about some of the challenges that are being posed to the whole world of governance through the diversity of data that's taking place within organizations. The types of data, they continue to evolve. So we want to make certain that we can future-proof our organization and be cognizant or be aware or be anticipating what types of data might be coming down the path that down the pike, I said earlier, to need to be governed. But the data types evolve, but a lot of the principles around governance, they persist. They endure, they stay on. I'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll talk about the role of context in defining data. And this is only the first subject of the 5 that I'm going to discuss with you today. So let me get to it, and hopefully it'll make sense to you. So the first thing I want to do is I have notes here that I'm not going to read from them, but there's certain things. I think the topic is so important that there's certain things that I know that I don't want to miss. So, we're going to take a little bit deeper of a dive into structured and unstructured data. And again, don't want to spend too much time on this, but the structured data exists in databases, in systems, in spreadsheets. Think of it, and this may not be the ultimate answer, but think of anything that has columns and rows in your organization. So the structured data exists in formats typically that you can access the data through the rows and the column, while unstructured data kind of breaks free of that. But I think there's a recognition these days that both the structured and unstructured data are being incorporated into the decision making of the organization, which means that we as data governance practitioners, excuse me, have to we have to be prepared for that. We need to tailor our strategies around governance to include not only just the structured data, if that's what you're focusing on now, but all the different types of data and records and content and those types of things that persist and actually are very important to the operations of an organization. Structured data is predictable. Unstructured data holds untapped, rich potential. I mean, anything that's in emails, anything that's in documents, anything that's in audio and video that is important enough to maintain at your organization, that is unstructured data. And that holds the answer to a lot of the questions that AI may be able to use to help to move your organization forward. So together, I say two sides of the same coin, together structured and unstructured data form that complete picture. And then if you add semi-structured to it, it makes governance essential. We need to bridge the challenges that are coming to us in these different types of data, in this diversity that we're seeing in the data types within the organization. The rise of semi-structured data, I'm telling you, it's on the rise. That's why I wrote in the article that I wrote about the how data governance is changing in 2025 that you can find on LinkedIn. And I wrote an article about unifying data governance, this convergence of bringing these types of data together is going to be important to our successful governance of data in the organization. So semi-structured, as I said before, blends structure and flexibility. JSON, XML, NoSQL. These are different types of semi-SQL, semi-structured databases, data within your organization. Organizations that are thinking about this into the future are building their holistic governance strategies to incorporate all of these things. And I'm going to keep hounding on it. And I'm going to keep talking about it. I'm going to talk about it into 2025 and beyond until at least my clients and hopefully most organizations recognize that there is a convergence happening, that AI really doesn't give a hoot. Mark, I'm keeping it clean here. It doesn't give a hoot about where the data comes from. This is the convergence that I'm talking about. This is the unifying data governance. We need to govern, and I'll stop preaching to the choir here. We need to make certain that we're governing both structured, all three, unstructured, structured, and semi-structured data. And there is, if it hasn't hit your doorstep yet, it's going to hit there soon. So there is a rise of the semi-structured data. When I originally put this slide deck together, I hadn't had too many conversations about it. But then when I started writing about it, people started asking questions about, well, what do you mean by, what is semi-structured data? Is there semi-structured data? Does it get managed differently than the other types of data? Okay, so what are some of the challenges that this world of diversity around data that we need to be concerned with? Well, first of all, we need to address their unique structure, their unique uses, the risks that are associated with them. So we need to make certain that our governance strategy is addressing these unique things, that the things that are unique to each of these different types of data. We know that we need to manage access, security, and quality. Think about the quality of unstructured data. Think about what that is going to entail within your organization. If we're not paying attention to that, then we're going to feed data to our AI models that potentially is not quality data. And we don't want to make decisions based on things that aren't quality data. So data silos, inconsistent policies, the policies have to be different for structured data and unstructured data. And I just still feel that there's a lot of challenges that are going to be introduced in our environment, enough that I rated it literally as being the number one way that data governance is going to change in 2025, if it hasn't already changed yet within your organization. So there are a lot of challenges in this world of diverse data within our organization. I talked earlier just real quickly about how data types seem to evolve. There seem to be new places to go to get data. They're coming in different formats. You might argue that some of those formats are the same, but they're coming from different places. The information that's available about that data is different, is even evolving. The data governance principles, though, they tend to endure. When I do a best practice analysis for a client, typically the very first best practice, and I've said this before in webinars, is that senior leadership understand a support sponsor and understand what the heck it is we're doing with governance, why it's necessary, what it's going to take to be successful, and how it's in their best interest to truly understand that ungoverned data is going to cause them problems in the long run. That's an enduring principle of data governance, the number one best practice 100% of the time for the clients that I work with. Think about that. The governing and principles that senior leadership needs to support, sponsor, and understand that there's a lot of different types of data, that it all needs to be governed in order to get the value that comes from, AI comes from anything that they're investing heavily in now. So the governance principles provide a timeless foundation. As the types evolve, core values, they basically remain critical. They remain effective. We need to know who's accountable. We need to be transparent, consistent. So all of these things, structured data, unstructured data, or hybrid or semi-structured data, they all benefit from having a governance framework, because the types of data are going to continue to evolve, and you're going to find new sources coming from different places. And you know what? You're not going to have clean metadata from each of these sources. And you're going to need to govern this data, and you're going to need to make it observable to people across your organization. So data types evolve, principles not so much. So I think governance is governance. Now, when you add in AI governance, that could be another topic for another day, but that is, a lot of times focused around ethics and privacy of data. Um, the data types evolve, but basically data governance or governance in general is staying the same. And this is just kind of a lead into my conversation in a couple minutes about metadata. So data's value is unlocked when its context aligns with specific needs of the organization. I've always said that you take data and you add context to it, it becomes information. You give me a number, you don't know if it's an address, a dollar amount, a count, you don't know what it is, a time, you really don't know until you add that context. And that the same thing's going to hold true for all three of these types of data that I'm talking about today. Context really needs to align with the specific needs of your organization. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time here, if I leave myself any time, to talk about metadata and metadata management and how important of a role it's going to play in structured and unstructured and semi-structured governance excellence. Basically, you take a piece. So I've always said the equation of data plus metadata equals information, or data plus context equals information. It doesn't become usable to anybody until they have that context. So that's what this slide's all about, is creating the context, making certain that you have the appropriate context, sharing the context when it's appropriate. Because again, data is data, and it's very hard to tell what it is if you don't have that context in the metadata. Stay tuned, more to come here in a couple minutes. And I think I'm going to need to move a little bit quicker, Mark, here, because I got a lot to say on this subject. And I'm not even looking at my notes. So I spend a lot of time talking about crafting a framework. I'm going to share with you, as I said, the non-invasive data governance framework. And I spoke in Washington, D.C. last week at DGIQ East for 3 hours about how to take the framework that I'm going to share with you here in a minute and turn it into a framework for AI as well. And that's going to incorporate both structured and unstructured and semi-structured data within the framework. And so I know that I hear from every organization that I talk to that their data is siloed across the organization. Usually they're just talking about structured data. Think about in terms of unstructured data. Think about how that's siloed, how that's it's not micromanaged, it's managed down to the person level in a lot of organizations. So there's silos of data out there. So we need to talk about creating a framework that's going to work across those silos. We need to balance flexibility and control in a framework. We need to, and this is one of the core tenets of non-invasive data governance, is we need to embed governance into existing workflows. Instead of saying, we're going to redefine all of our workflows, we're already governing. A process is a form of governance. We need to get the right people involved at the right time for the right reason in that process. We need to build governance into workflows instead of introducing it as something brand new to the organization. That's the whole idea of non-invasive data governance. I'll talk about tailoring policies and future-proofing your framework for the evolving needs of the direction data is going and the evolving needs of the organization. So I use the term bridge in the definition, in the description of the framework I'm going to share with you on the next slide, because I typically talk about what are the core components of of data governance for an organization. And I define them as being data and roles and processes, communications, metrics, and tools. You'll see that in the image I'm going to show you on the next screen. The bridges are where there's, and I talk about the levels of the organization being executive, strategic, tactical, operational, and support. And that fits into many organizations. They may rename them, they may reorder them, whatever. It doesn't really matter for the fact of talking about these bridges. But the bridges are where one of those core components meet one of those levels. What data is important at the executive level? What's the role of the support level? How do we communicate with people at the strategic level? All of that is built into the framework that I'm going to share with you. So we're going to talk a little bit here about crafting a framework to address both structured and unstructured data. And the idea is that we want to unify governance across the different silos. And I'm going to talk about these bridges as a way to at least start to document how are we going to address these things at each of the different levels. So we need a framework to break down the silos. We need to support the integration of the different characteristics of the different data into the processes, into the communications that are taking place in our organization. So when I mentioned earlier, unified governance, really the goal is to empower organizations to address all these things that are really important. Excuse me, compliance, security, value extraction, holistically, regardless of where the data is and who has responsibility for that data. Hold on one second. I haven't taken a break. See, I love this subject so much. And that's why I said this is the subject of the year, because I think it's what's coming in 2025. So down here on the bottom left, and I'll make this bigger on the screen here in a minute, is the framework that I talked about last week in DC, that I'm going to talk about in the EDGO session on January 22nd. As you can see, it's got the different core components of a governance framework across the top. It's got the different levels down the left-hand side. And then those bridges are those empty squares. And John Zachman, the person who I modeled my framework after, the Zachman framework for enterprise architecture, he would repeat, at some point, you're going to want to know what's behind each and every one of these blocks in the framework. And to be honest with you, depending on the complexity of your organization, with this framework, you're going to want to know each of those things that I said, how to communicate at each level, how to measure the success, what tools are being used. The tools at the executive level are going to be different than the tools at the operational level of your organization. Again, not here to talk to you about the framework, but thinking about, I wanted to include it as a subject that we should craft a framework to address structured and unstructured data. And just because I'm nice, I wanted to also make it bigger so that you could see it on the screen. I know these things are hard to read when I make the images really small, but again, just wanted to share with you what this framework looks like, and welcome you to join us on January 22nd at EDGO when I talk about how the value of having a framework like this to data and to AI. Mark, I got to get moving here. Embedding governance in this slide here is all about the core ideal of non-invasive data governance, is building governance into workflows. Integrating this into what people do in their job, not making them feel like you're hitting them over the stick and assigning them more responsibility. So embedding whatever governance needs to be in place around the structured or semi-structured or unstructured data, embedding that into workflows instead of making it feel like it's over and above what people are doing. I don't know about you, but I don't like to be assigned something, because immediately when I'm assigned something, I feel like it's over and above the things that I have to do. So I don't like the idea of assigning people as stewards. We need to embed this into what people do. And again, I'm going to go quickly through some of these slides. You'll have a copy of the slide deck as well within 2 days when DATAVERSITY sends that and the recording to you. I hope you'll go back and look at this and raise some questions to me if you have some questions. when you're building your data policies in your organization, they must be adaptable to address each of these different types of data and the characteristics of these data. Um, from my experience, any organization that seems to take a one size fits all approach, there are some things around governance that persist and maintain across all the different types of data, like knowing ownership, knowing responsibility, knowing when it was last updated. There's a lot of things there, but you can't follow a one size fits all approach. You're going to really need to tailor the policies of your organization to fit data diversity and the different types of data that you have within your organization. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier about future proofing your framework for evolving data needs. You want to be anticipating. You heard the song Anticipation, It's Making Me Wait. Anticipation, we need to be anticipating the emerging types of data and the governance challenges that come along with those types of data. So flexibility and scalability will be key. Regularly reviewing and updating your governance practices will be a key. Future proofing to make certain that the things that we're writing about and that we are talking about don't kind of fade into the woodwork. That's really important. We always want to be thinking about the future of our organizations and what's coming down the pike. I've talked about pikes more often than I've ever talked about pikes before in one of my webinars, in a lot of webinars. Um, okay, let's spend a little bit of time talking about metadata and taxonomies for structured and unstructured data. And as I said, metadata really matters. It is the backbone of governance. We need to build a taxonomy. I'm pretty sure I wrote an article recently that I published on LinkedIn. It seems to be one of my favorite places there and TDAN to publish my materials on what are some of the specific metadata attributes that we need to collect about structured, unstructured, semi-structured data. I don't have a link to that right now, but I'll put that in the in what we send to you if it's requested. Talk about metadata is the key to having people be able to discover data. Talk about unlocking context. When I was talking about that article, I provided a list of metadata attributes that were appropriate for each of the different types of data, if you're interested. So harmonizing definitions, building out this context of the data, building out the metadata and the taxonomy is important to drive clarity and consistency. So metadata, and if you've known me for a long time, I've always talked about metadata. I've talked about metadata governance. Metadata matters. It's the backbone of your governance of any type of data within your organization, because how are people going to know that they can trust it? How are people going to find it unless you have information about that data, whether it's, how many times have I said this? Structured, unstructured, or semi-structured within the organization. So the effective metadata management ensures consistency, traceability, bridges the gap between these things. I think in that same article, I talked about the overlap between the metadata attributes that actually apply to both structured and unstructured data. And the last thing I'll say about on this slide as it being the backbone is that without metadata, the understanding and the categorization and the leveraging the data, it becomes a huge challenge. So folks, if you're going to take one thing away from this webinar, I hope that you'll consider where metadata plays a big role in structured and unstructured data governance excellence. I don't have a whole lot of time to talk about this, but the taxonomies provide a shared language. They bridge the gap between data types. And then again, the information that you have, the ability to be able to categorize and to leverage the different types of data in your organization should be a very important part of the strategy of governance, of building an excellent governance or excellence in governance around the different types of data in your organization. Without metadata, how are people supposed to find the data? Metadata basically acts as, I love this analogy, the GPS for your data, guiding users to where they need to go, where they need information quickly and they need it efficiently, and they need to have confidence in that same data. So, and when I go and I was going to say use my Garmin, but I don't have a Garmin device anymore. My car has the device in it. But when I used the Garmin, I trusted that it would take me to where I wanted to go. That's how important metadata is for the data, all the different types of data in your organization. Effective metadata enhances discoverability. I'll take that one step further. I'll say that it's going to be almost impossible to find data if you don't have data about that data if you don't have metadata in the context. And the metadata connects structured and unstructured data, ensures consistency, accuracy. Again, don't want to read from the slides to you, but metadata is the key to making the data available, no matter what the data is. And we've got to start thinking beyond the structured data. Unlocking the context through taxonomy. I mean, I think that this is we need to do that because the data, the information that people want from the data that is not only structured, but is this unstructured or semi-structured data, the emails from the documents, from the policies, taking the policies off the wall and interpreting them and making them available to people in the organization. That's just another use of structured and unstructured data within your organization. So unlocking the context through the taxonomy is really important as well. I talk about harmonizing definitions, trying to use similar language as we're moving this forward. Unified definitions ensure clarity. Harmonizing the metadata builds that common language. I know I've written about that a lot. I've talked about that in webinars, about building that common language across the organization. Well, our data has just multiplied many times over. And we need to make certain that we're not losing sight that the metadata is going to play an important role in that. So again, we got to consider metadata and taxonomies for structured and unstructured data. And I can just see to my left here on another screen that the chat's going wild. There's a lot of people on there that are in the discussion. So feel free to chat about this as we're talking about this in the webinar. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about leveraging technology. And again, I mentioned an article that I wrote about the AI catalog. And that's like a data catalog. It's a structured data catalog, unstructured, semi-structured. And if you work for a vendor, I hope you're already addressing this because the world will pass you by if you're just there to support the structured data. So I'll talk a little bit about tech enabling governance. Talk also about how tech isn't the answer to your governance problem, but it's certainly an enabler of success. Automating compliance and how important it is, tools that bridge the unstructured and structured realms of data, leveraging AI. Let me go into these things quickly and see if I can also then leave a couple minutes at the end of the session to see if we have any questions in all these comments that I'm seeing fly by on my screen to my left. Technology is not the answer. You cannot implement a AI catalog or a data catalog or a metadata repository and therefore say that we have now governed our data. Tech is really there. Technology is there to enable governance without overcomplicating it. It's actually there to simplify it. So when we talk about this within our organizations, the technology is not the answer. It may be part of the answer. We need some place to store all this metadata and all this context that I've been talking about. So I always suggest to organizations that they leverage the tools that they have already within their organizations, but we need to make it, the vendors need to make it so that this information is readily available and easy to find in these tools. So we can't overcomplicate. Because if we think about all the different types of data, the types of metadata that are there to support those different types of data, there's a lot of different types of metadata. We've got to keep that in mind as we are looking at tools into the future for our organization, that if it doesn't handle unstructured data or semi-structured data, we're going to hit a roadblock at some point in time. So focusing on technology that really complements the things that you're doing in the organization, things that you can seamlessly drop into the existing processes of your organization that ensure that people will adopt these things and it will be minimally disruptive to the things that they're presently doing. Again, my intention is to try to stay as non-invasive in terms of governance as we can within the organizations that we're working for. And if you over-engineer your technical solution, you're probably going to be complicating it to the point where people may not be able to get the value that you'd like them to see from the data. I'm going to talk for a moment about automating compliance in a data-driven world. I know from my experience that anytime that we rely on something becoming a manual task, there's always that risk that that task will not be done. And so automation ensures things like compliance. It ensures that people are, it minimizes human error by just kind of building it into the process. So anywhere where you can automate things, compliance is a great thing to automate if you can automate these. This is not an area that is my specialty, but think about it in terms of your structured and your unstructured data. We're going to need to comply to regulations and rules associated with all of the different data types. The better that we can set ourselves up to automate the compliance of it in this data-driven world that we're living in, the better off we're going to be. And the modern tools just make certain that that this unification, this convergence of information governance and data governance that's coming, if it's not already here in 2025, that the tools that we use have the ability under, if you can do this under a single cohesive platform. I've worked in the unstructured data space, in the content management, records management, information governance space, and I know there's a lot of tools that are out there that support unstructured data. Document management, content management, records management has been around since the beginning of time. And it's something that data governance people are really now starting to pay attention to, just like the people in the unstructured world are looking at structured data governance. And that's why I'm saying these things are going to converge in 2025. Everybody, this is the goal of every organization that I know of, is that leveraging AI for smarter data oversight. That's what we're trying to do. And again, I know I've said this multiple times, that the data will not govern itself. We need to have the tools, we need to have the technology, we need to have the people, we need to have the governance framework and governance in order to govern the data, no matter what type of data it is. We need to be able to scale our governance programs to be able to keep up with the pace of changing data environment in our organization. We need to ensure a framework that's going to work for all types of data at all different levels of the organization. And we need to be cognizant of the roles and responsibilities, the communications, the processes, and the other things that I shared, at least as being the core component of the non-invasive data governance framework. And so I left myself a few minutes, and I'm going to fly through these quickly and then turn it back to you, Mark, to see if we have any questions about all the stuff that I've shared today. Boy, I haven't really looked at my notes once. So again, this is a subject that I think everybody needs to be talking about. If you remember on the second slide of the slide deck, I listed a whole bunch of organizations that I've worked with. I'm not going to name each of these success stories, but I'm just going to talk briefly about how one organization unified structured and unstructured data, turning unstructured data into a strategic asset, how structured data has been the focus of, I think that would apply to probably all of those organizations that I mentioned. So let me jump into the case studies here and then turn it over to you, Mark. In one organization, they recognized when I started talking to them that they had structured data and unstructured data, and they knew that they wanted to govern it in one model. They knew also that they didn't have an existing records management or information management function, which is pretty surprising because most organizations seem to have that. So they said, as we're building out our data governance model, we want to somehow break down the silos that are taking place between the different parts of the organization. So they adopted a unified governance model. The model improved all the different aspects, from the processes to the communications that took place in the company. And as a result, they achieved, or they're on their way to achieving, faster decision making, better risk management within their organization, and to get more value out of their data. Another organization, as I said, focused specifically on content management and records management. In fact, they received an MRA from the government, a matter requiring attention. And if you are in the government space, you know that an MRA needs to be addressed. They now have MRIAs, which are matters requiring immediate attention. Their focus was turning this unstructured data, this records management. I worked with a records management person to turn their unstructured data into a strategic asset of the organization. And truly, by the time I was done working with them, they turned the corner to turn this liability of this unstructured data into an asset that people could find and that people could leverage. again, I mentioned that this success story could basically, I mean, I think it's a success story that's being written in many organizations, maybe in your organization. You struggle with siloed data, leading to inefficiencies in reporting, management, decision making. I mean, you have a lot of these same problems. Any organization that is focusing on governing their structured data first, or even all three of these types of data, they're looking for a result that shows a boost in efficiency, people getting to data quicker, enabling faster insight, saving money across the business. I think this is the last one real quickly, and I think this one also pertains to every organization that I've worked with. I mean, most of you or face challenges associated with governing structured data and unstructured data and semi-structured data across your organization. You're looking for the same result that this organization is looking for: improved product quality, enhanced customer satisfaction, streamlining your decision making. I think if you can see yourself in any of these success stories and you can understand the things that I talked to you about today, I think it's pretty straightforward. We can't neglect this any longer. We need to engage and we need to focus on governing both structured and unstructured data in our organizations moving forward. Oh, there was one more success story. Organizations, again, I don't want to read it to you, but there's always a lot of pushback within organizations. I think AI is helping us in these organizations to make our story clear, that we need people to have confidence in the data. We need to trust the data. We need to overcome this resistance within organizations. Add unstructured data, add semi-structured data to that story, and help them to understand that this is not a simple fix. It's going to take time. We need to do it incrementally, but success comes. I think the that comes in the very first step. As you start moving towards successfully governing all the different types of data in your organization. So, Mark, I left a little bit of time for Q&A. I just want to just real quickly talk about the things that I talked about. First of all, I broke down structured data, unstructured data, semi-structured data, and kind of provided many different examples of that type of data. I talked about the importance of having a framework to help us to position our governance of all these types of data effectively. I talked a lot about the importance of metadata and taxonomies in helping people to be able to locate and trust and have confidence in the data and in the data that's being produced from our AI models and things like that. Leveraging technology and in the importance of cataloging and recording and inventorying the different types of data assets within our organization. And then I quickly ran through some examples of some organizations that are doing this effectively within their organization. And with that, Mark, I'm going to leave us at least a couple more minutes to talk about, to see if there's any questions for today.
Well, we've got like chat was electric, so thank you, chat, for being so amazing as always. We've got lots of questions in the Q&A, and we've got some of my favorite questions. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say here, Bob. So, a core activity of data governance for structured data is assuring, sorry, the quality of the data in the tables. We have well-established practices for data quality. How do we ensure the quality of unstructured and semi-structured data?
Wow, what a great question.
I
You're
think that's a whole
right.
webinar.
It's probably more than a whole webinar, because think about all the different types of unstructured data. So how
Mhm.
do you assure the quality of a Word document? How do you assure the quality of a slide deck, like structured and unstructured data governance excellence and like that? How do you assure the quality of these things? And there is so much of these things throughout your organization. Improving the quality is not going to be as easy as saying, okay, these are the allowable values, and these things fall within range or out of range of those values. That's the typical dimensions of data quality. They still apply, but it's going to apply. How do you assure the quality of audio or video, especially in this day of deep fakes and things like that? How do you assure the quality of these things? That's a great question. I am sorry, I am not going to be able to answer it here, but it's not going to happen on its own. So that's the key answer that I'll answer to that question is, it's not going to self-resolve. It's not going to improve its own quality. It's going to take humans And artificial intelligence, I'm assuming if artificial intelligence can do some of the things that humans can do to validate. I mean, look at the output that comes from ChatGPT. You can't just hand it and give it, you just can't take it and give it to anybody. It needs to be validated. Well, any of the unstructured data needs to be validated too. It was a great question. I'm
It's a
sorry,
great
I
question.
can't address it in this period of time.
I think it's a philosophical debate almost.
It is.
All right. If roles are not assigned within data governance framework, how can they be formally recognized in the enterprise? So this is somebody who's never quite understood that aspect of non-invasive data governance.
Well, I don't like to use the word assigned because there's
Right.
already people in the organization that are defining, producing, and using data as part of their job. There's already subject matter experts that, and I refer to them as kind of the stewards of domains of data that we go to. So I'm not saying that we don't need to associate people with the roles of stewardship. I just think that the approach that we take to it really helps to determine the success of our communications about it to the organization. If you go around tapping people on the shoulder, assigning them to be data stewards and telling them to go do data steward stuff, their eyes are going to gloss over and roll back in their head. They're not going to know what to do as far as data steward stuff is concerned. But if they define data and they're given some method to do a better job of defining data for the organization, or they're producing data based on their knowledge of how this data is going to be used, or they're using data appropriately, there's already people that are doing this. And if now we move from an informal structure of governance to more of a formal structure, we just need to record who these stewards are. We don't need to assign them. It's going to come to the same conclusion, is that we're going to associate a person with a role in our governance program. I stay away from using the word assign because it's very invasive, and as you can tell, I like to talk about non-invasive.
Hmm. Yeah, I always used to say too, Bob, when following your methodology is when in doubt, write it out. Just just make sure you document stuff and you're part of the way there. Um,
Yeah,
Here's my favorite question, Bob, and just because I have some experience with this, do you differentiate between analog, physical, and digital data? So analog, physical being like photos, microfiche, and so on. And I remember telling you, Bob, this one organization I think that we both worked at that had a bunch of student transcripts and student historical grades on microfiche, and we'd always have to go back and and read them. I felt like a super spy.
Mark, I think you made my brain just explode with that question. I think that a lot of it falls into those other categories other than structured data. Some of it falls into
Mhm.
structured data too, but a lot of it is unstructured. So how do you take an image? A photograph, like you said, that, and things that are analog. There's no single answer to that, and I don't think we're gonna have time to address it today, but I would say that if you would put it under the category of unstructured data or semi-structured data within your organization, I don't know if there's a structure to an image. I don't know if you can trust an image anymore just by looking at it. I mean, I think it's a scary world out there. And you know what? We're all of us, all of you that are still on the call here today, any of you that listen to this, we're in the middle of this. And we need to make certain that this data, no matter what the type of data is being governed successfully. And we're going to be counting on AI to give us results from this data. It darn well better be trusted and better be assured that we can have confidence and that we're protecting the heck out of the data too, because at some point that's going to become a question too.
Well, that gets back to our first question. Like, what does quality even mean in the case of these unstructured and semi-structured documents, right? I think
That's an add-on
discussion that
question.
needs to be had.
Well,
Yeah.
shoot, we already have 12 subjects for 2025. How can we find, we'll have to do a separate webinar. We'll need to find a sponsor and we'll do a webinar on that. But I think it's a great question. These are really great questions. So please send them to me. Keep putting your questions in. I'll answer them the best I can or direct you to resources. And I know, Mark, we need to mention that they'll get a copy of this, the slides and the recording by Monday, I believe.
You bet. We just have one super fast question. I think then we'll wrap it up. What is the key to help those in charge of budget who do not understand the value of data governance to allocate funds and understand the ROI?
Well, I've always been somebody who said that the governance doesn't have to cost a lot of data, but that's obviously not true. There's going to be it's going to cost a lot of money. I mean, it's yeah, we need to budget it. So just as an example on the side, I mentioned this earlier in the webinar, I'm part of this Chief Data and AI Officer certificate program at Carnegie Mellon University. And they're all challenged with budgeting, operational expense, capital expense, and those types of things. There, one of the things that I see that's a positive for all of us is that people that are now reaching that level of the organization have grown through many organizations. So they've learned and they've lived this stuff that we're talking about here, and they're going to be easier to convince. Again, blood doesn't come from a stone. You've got to be able to find the money. The problem is that there's going to be a lot of risk involved in doing these things if you don't govern all of your types of data. And if they are not willing to put money into that, again, it's the technology isn't the answer. It's having a good approach and a good framework to follow. That's the first question. That's the first thing that needs to be addressed. The technology and the things that truly cost a lot of money within organizations,
Right.
the money has to come from somewhere. So, if you're truly going to be data driven, then it's a great line to end the session with, Mark. Put your money where your mouth is, right?
Good call, Bob. And thank you for this great presentation and the wonderful Q&A. Thank you, chat, for being so engaged. That's all we have time for today. So just to remind everybody, we will be posting the recorded webinar and slides on our website within a couple of business days, and we'll send a follow-up email to let you know the links and any other requested information. So thank you again, everybody, for attending today's webinar, and have a
And
happy holidays.
happy holidays, happy new year. Have a happy, healthy, and prosperous 2025. I'm looking forward to talking to you again next year. So thank you again very much.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody.